Tony Regisford, and you're watching Unrendered on IKTV. You can follow us on Twitter at iConcepts. My guest on this edition is Professor Hilary Beckles. Professor Beckles, we're moving into our last segment, and we've got quite a bit to cover here. Let's pick it up from this Durban conference that took place in 2001, this Durban, South Africa. You were there. Tell me what were the outcomes, because it was a conference on xenophobia, against racial discrimination, racism, etc. What were the outcomes? From the Caribbean perspective, there was an African delegation there as well, and there were the British there. What were the outcomes of that conference?
The outcomes, I believe, from a Caribbean perspective, was primarily to clarify for us what the thinking is in Europe, how they see this history, how they see themselves as the beneficiaries of slavery and what they're prepared to do, and how they see us in the Caribbean and what role they believe we ought to play. Bear in mind that reparations has received a very bad press, and that very bad press has to do with the propaganda that has come out of Western Europe. The notion that reparations is about black people standing around on street corners waiting for a check from somebody. Mm-hmm. If you define reparations that way, and then the Caribbean people have come to accept that that is what reparations is, then you have successfully discredited reparations. It is not about handing out checks on street corners. It is not about believing that some individual in England owes you personally and your family something. It is about looking at the poverty that exists in the Caribbean, the wealth that was taken out of the Caribbean, and how the people who have gone through 300 years of slavery are now left to languish in poverty. So it is really about development. How do we develop the Caribbean against this history? And what role do those persons and institutions who took the wealth out of the Caribbean have to play in returning to the site of the crime to help with clarifying the way forward now? In Durban, the Europeans effectively said, we have no responsibility for you. That is the position. As far as we're concerned, slavery is in the past. It's in the distant past. Reparations is something we are not going to discuss. We have no obligation to discuss it, and we're not going to discuss it. So that was a position that they adopted, which was a very firm and aggressive position. Our position in the Caribbean was no, that you have committed these crimes. These crimes have had an enduring legacy. The consequences are still debilitating to the Caribbean societies. The Caribbean societies do not have the resources to clean up this mess that you have left behind. Mm-hmm. You have to come and help to clean up this mess. And the mess is social, it's cultural, it's economic. You have to come and help. Now, their reaction to this is, okay, well, we'll give you aid. We will give you aid from time to time.
Yeah, but they're not tying it to...
Correct.
To the reparations conversation.
Our reaction is that we do not need a dialogue in which you see your historical relationship to the Caribbean as one of victims who are going to get aid. If you wish to give aid to the Caribbean, that's entirely within your international diplomatic obligation. Mm. But there's a bigger issue here behind that. There's a bigger issue. The issue is international law calling upon you to repair the damage that you have done to these communities and to these individuals. Since Durban, there has been a cold silence. Mm. Because at Durban, it was recognized that slavery and slave trading are crimes against humanity. But what the Europeans did was to use their diplomatic influence and the Western nations to put an interesting twist upon this, which says, if slavery and the slave trade were to function today, there would be crimes. But at the time,
it was legal.
We legalized slavery. We legalized the slave trade, so therefore we did nothing wrong. Now, the critical feature of international law says that if you commit a moral offense that is at the level of a crime against humanity, you cannot hide behind your laws. You cannot say, well, we made it legal. If that was the case, then Hitler and his
Right.
and
He
his
doesn't
thugs
he doesn't have a charge to answer.
would have gotten away with that
Neither
because
does Saddam Hussein
right,
and all these people.
because the German
Ameri-
government, yes, the
that
German
the Americans
government
pursue.
correct. The German government said the massacre of the Jewish people.
Yes.
We legalized it. The government legalized it. It was legalized by the state, so it's legal. International law says you cannot commit these atrocities and crimes and hide behind your laws because there are international concepts that operate here.
Right.
And we will pursue you and bring you to justice. Yes. So what we have had to say to the European nations, no, slavery, you did not legalize it and therefore it should have been a crime. It was a crime. And furthermore, using your own documentation, many of your lawyers and your judges and your philosophies said, this is a crime, this is wrong, this is illegal, but unfortunately it was so powerful and so connected to economic development that it was brushed aside.
Yes.
Now, since Durban, I believe that the Caribbean has gradually found its way to coming together to recognize that this is a matter that cannot be brushed under the carpet anymore.
Where did the Africans at that conference sit? Where were they on that issue?
In 2001, I believe that many of those African countries that were in the grip of the IMF and the World Bank, and they were told categorically through their diplomatic channels that if they take up this reparations issue in the global scale, they will pay the consequences.
So it was a question of intimidation, right?
No, we were clear. We were clear in Durban that many of the African countries were intimidated. And I believe that Nigeria and Senegal were intimidated. South Africa had tried its best to balance all of this because the Nelson Mandela issue was very strong. And they were saying, let's have a dialogue, let's speak. Those nations in Africa that were taking a strong view on this were some of the countries that the West were opposed to. Zimbabwe took a strong view, Algeria, Libya. These countries were saying, no, this is a matter that should be discussed and discussed clearly, and that the world is not going to move on to a higher level until we settle these matters. So there was a slight divide between the Caribbean and Africa on this. And I can tell you, though, behind the scenes, many of our African friends will say to us, you know, we are with you morally and philosophically, politically, we are with you.
But as a matter of experience.
But right now, things are tight and we can't. So there was that kind of thing. And we said, well, we understand. Because I presume many Caribbean governments would have been in the same position.
Yes.
But at the same time, the critical thing was to win the debate. We won the debate that reparations is not about conflict. Reparations is not about confrontation. I was asked to speak on behalf of all the Caribbean governments at Durban. And I made it very clear to the European Union, to the Western nations, we are not here to have conflict. We are here for reconciliation. The reparations movement is about creating an environment where you have a win-win. It's about saying to those persons who have been the beneficiaries, have some moral reflection on the question.
Yes.
See that there are victims on the other side. And it is in your philosophical and economic interest to come and participate in healing these wounds. So you appeal to the finest qualities within those beneficiary nations and ask them to take that step.
Yes.
Not easy for them, it's difficult because vested financial interest is still there.
And I want to look at, highlight a particular case here. Let's look at the case of Haiti. Okay? Haiti was the first liberated West Indian, African diasporal state, if you want to say, or country. Haiti was made to pay in the Declaration of their Independence, subsequent to that, and you have it in your book, was made to pay a sum of some 90 million gold francs or something.
Tremendous amount of money.
Which you mentioned was double their GDP at the time. Okay, so let's roll along. I think it was 2004. It comes President Aristide. I'm not sure the date.
Yes, that's right.
So Aristide comes, and he makes a formal request to the French government to pay them back the equivalent, which then would have been 21 billion
US dollars.
Aristide disappeared as being president as a result of a joint invasion of the USA and the French government. They went in, they took Aristide out, it was couched as a resignation. This is a duly elected, democratic, a person who went through the democratic process of being elected. Is that the sort of reaction we can expect if the reparation conversation becomes, an affront on the financial security of these beneficiary nations?
I think not. The world has changed a great
But this was
deal.
just 2004.
The world has changed a great deal, and the reparations issue has now become a normal global political process. And the international courts are very keen to watch and observe these issues. Mm-hmm. I think not. And also, too, the citizens in Europe are very concerned about this matter. The states are not as progressive as the citizens. Recently, for example, when the Mau case was settled in the British court, there was a rising movement of British citizens who were saying no. While the British government was not prepared to go into the conversation, the citizens were developing a movement. The students and younger people were saying, if you committed these crimes and we did not know about them, and we have not been taught about them in school, it's not in the school curriculum, we were not exposed to the things that you did on our behalf, so to speak, we want to have these matters settled. So the British public was actually rising up in support of the Mau having the right for justice. So I think that what is going to happen in Western Europe is that the citizens of Western Europe have matured to the point of information and knowledge where they are now calling upon their governments to deal with these matters. So the governments might be reluctantly pushed into dealing with them by their own citizens.
Yes.
And I think also, too, that in the Caribbean, it is well known that in the Caribbean, we recognize that we have a special relationship to Great Britain. Certainly in the English-speaking Caribbean, we have a special relationship. In fact, one might very well say we're family. History has made us family. So in a family, if you're calling for justice for some of the children, you have to have justice for some of the children. You don't want to break up the family. You don't want to create strife in the family, but you want all members of the family to be treated equally. And that is your duty to do so. I believe that Caribbean leaders are now very clear that they understand the gravity of the matter. And I believe that they have the sophistication to make the case in an orderly fashion. I think Prime Minister Gonzalez, who is providing much of the organizational and intellectual leadership, fully well understands that, that this is not about conflict. And if he is able to craft within British Caribbean diplomacy a way forward, he will find it. And I believe that all of us are hoping that we can find that way. In the university, for example, our University of the West Indies is very closely linked to British universities.
Right.
So as an academic from the Caribbean, I have deep roots in Britain. In fact, my academic training took place in Britain.
And Hull.
Yes, and Britain was really my second home. Right. So I see Britain as my second home. My family is there. I'm a part of British society. But at the same time, I would like the society of Britain that I care about to rise up to its full potential and do the right thing. So by encouraging a society to do the right thing and to take certain steps is not to be opposed to that society.
Let me ask a final question, and this is in terms of the Caribbean and the various leaders and where they stand. Prime Minister Simpson Miller of Jamaica recently, as recent as last year, said that she is not going to make a call for reparations. Now, Jamaica, as you mentioned, was the largest market for slaves, for receiving market for slaves. Now, does that infuriate you? Does that bother you?
Well, I was in Nigeria giving a lecture and actually meeting with some of the government ministers on this question when it came over the Nigerian news that the Jamaican Prime Minister have exercised reservations about all of this. And that news sped through the mass media in Africa. I was surprised by this. When I returned to the Caribbean, of course, I tried to get to the bottom of it. I think I am now satisfied that the news story did not reflect what the thinking was of Prime Minister Simpson Miller, and I have spoken to her about this matter. It was a circumstance where she was hosting Prince Harry.
Okay.
And I think the way in which she was approached by the media while Prince Harry was standing next to her, and I think she was trying to be civil and diplomatic in the context of hosting the young prince, that the language might not have been as clear, and so I think it went out. But the important thing is that she has established now the Jamaican Reparations Commission. She has put Jamaica fully behind this initiative.
Okay. And
Jamaica will play the historic role that it has always played in these progressive causes. So I am satisfied that, that she will be very forceful in seeking social justice for the Jamaican people. In fact, she has said to me that beyond the broader question of reparations, that there are some specific issues in Jamaica that needs to be looked at.
That needs to be addressed.
The Morant Bay Massacre.
Yes.
Now, if you take the Morant Bay Massacre, where the British government massacred hundreds of people, poor people, because they squatted on land to make a living, crown lands, and they squatted to plant crops and foods, and the governor was given permission to send the army and massacre those people.
Yes.
The same thing happened in India in 1919. So there was a Amritsar massacre, where the British Army massacred Indian people for squatting on land.
And there's a parallel in Jamaica.
And then there was the Morant Bay massacre, where Paul Bogle and those people were killed. The Indian government have now told the British government, we want this matter settled, and the British government have gone to Amritsar, and they have apologized, and they have gone into all of that.
Yes.
But it hasn't happened in Jamaica. So the Indian government have said this matter must be addressed. India, as you know, is an emerging nation that is playing its role on the global stage. And they are demanding, and they have got it now. Yes. The question is, as I have said at the beginning of the program, weak nations, nations that are not firm, nations that have no resolve, do not get reparations. And I think the Caribbean nation, or the nations of the Caribbean, have now reached this stage with leadership, and I want to commend Prime Minister Gonzalez. They have reached a stage now where they're saying, let us settle these matters in an orderly fashion.
Professor Hilary Beckles, it's been a pleasure having you here. Sadly, we're out of time.
The pleasure's mine.
When you come back to St. Vincent, please do pop into this.
It would be an honor, Tony, and thank you for allowing me to share my views with your audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
This has been another edition of Unrendered. My guest was Professor Hilary Beckles. He is the author of this book, Britain's Black Debt. Jomo Thomas is up next with Plain Talk.